Hey guys, what's up? Roston. Last night at about, God, it must have been about fucking 3 a.m. I found myself in a pretty strange sort of position uh, with a friend, with an acquaintance more so than anything else. Uh, Having a pretty interesting and complicated conversation about atheism and abortion. I would wager a good percentage, I would say more people who are atheists also tend to be pro-choice. There's a certain, to be a bit dramatic about it, atheism is almost like snatching the fire of life from God, and then using it to illuminate mankind's own path. And part of doing that, I think, is accepting a few unpleasant existential realities, and accepting that man has control over his own flesh. Now that was always kind of my point of argument when it came to abortion. I'm pro-choice, but there's definitely a sect of atheists who accept what can be referred to as the potential argument. The potential argument is thrown around quite a bit, although not as much, because it's an atheistic defense of people. It's an atheistic defense of pro-life stances, so it's not used that that often in religious circles for religious people who stand on the pro-life. But basically, the argument from potential states that every time you commit an abortion, or you have an abortion, you're throwing away a Michelangelo, you're throwing away a Da Vinci, you're throwing away an Einstein, or the potential for that. And that's not a terrible argument, but it's almost on par with the slippery slope argument, the what ifs. What if this happened? And it's like, well, you can't have that. I mean, it's an awful lot to wager on a what if. There are a million other points that you can bring up for and against abortion. Some are more valid than others. I think Christopher Hitchens was in sort of the what if field on the subject of abortion. He was under the impression that we were throwing away potential, and it's a fine position to have. But I disagreed with it, and I still disagree with it, because as I said, it's a what if. But I'm going to make another really unpleasant and uncomfortable argument right now. It's an argument that I consider myself a person that has a lot of empathy for others, and I really like the idea of the exceptional nature of the human spirit. I hold these because I have a very romantic view of life and so on, but I'm going to make a really unpleasant argument right now that is quite sterile, quite existential. In this conversation that I had with this acquaintance of mine, he made the argument. My personal take on it, it's easier for me to explain my opinion on abortion. I think first trimester abortions are an ethical green area. I think second trimester abortions are an ethically grey area. And I think third trimester abortions are definitely an ethically red area. I would consider the life of the mother paramount above all else. I would consider the preserving an operational and functional human being with an understanding of its mortality, I would consider the preservation of that entity above the preservation of an entity which does not know of its own mortality. So that's my take on that. But the argument was put to me as such, like, disbarring the idea of my ethical scale. Let's imagine we had a situation where an infant was born unconscious, and we knew, with complete certainty in this hypothetical scenario, that the infant had spent the majority, had spent all of its time developing in the womb unconscious. But we knew that a month or so after that child was born, that child would gain consciousness and lead a normal, human life. And the question was as such that, is it still ethical to abort that child, given that we know, this is a fully formed being, but it's just precognitive. It's an entity which doesn't know its own existence. And the question was, is it then ethical to terminate that child's life? I'm going to give a very controversial answer, and then I'm going to explain why. It is ethical to end the life of a being that has never known that it has been. An entity, I would consider, and people can argue with this with me, and I'm sure it might piss people off, I don't grant personhood to a being until it is cognitive. That's my personal line in the sand. The argument that my atheist friend made was, is again an argument from potential. This being has the potential to be cognitive, to grow up and become a normal human, etc., etc., etc. But I consider this from my own perspective, and it's a very sort of blank, what I feel a purely logical perspective. If I had never known what it was to be, then how could I ever be angry that I had never been? Do you understand that? Do you understand the idea that if something does not know that it exists and has no cognition of the fact that it exists, then it can never mourn its own lack of existence? The issue in this circumstance is more so other people. It's more so people's extension of empathy and how it hurts others. And those are additional contexts. And I'm not discounting those, but for the sake of this argument, they don't exist. We can use a purely logical language if you want. The position of pro-choice atheists is that when you perform an abortion, you terminate an action potential. The position I have as a pro-choice atheist is you never give the action potential a chance to start in the beginning. You sort of move the goalposts back to a point where the action potential never existed. So, in summary, I'm pro-abortion in the sense that terminating an entity which has never known consciousness is not ethically wrong. Again, because a thing which never knows itself can never mourn itself. So, the argument from potential is a poor argument to me. It's a what if. It's a Pascal's wager. And it also sort of retroactively assumes that, what you're doing is when you play the what if, then you're also granting the privilege of consciousness to an entity which doesn't have it. And then bringing it up to that level because it has the potential of becoming a conscious entity. Effectively, This is where I feel pro-choice atheists are wrong. Because they're granting an action potential where there is none. They want to grant rights to a non-cognitive entity. And I disagree with it. And I just felt that I needed to get that point out and have a ramble on it. And that's it. We'll return to more relevant social programming down the line. But for now, I'm Ross Dunn. Like, comment, subscribe.